All right, so first of all, thanks to Kathy and the IEEE for inviting me. I thought this was an interesting panel. When Kathy first said talk about the future of VR and AR, that was a little bit daunting. I've been involved with VR for 20 plus years at this point, going back to the early 90s, and AR for about half as long. Mostly what I do at Xmark, we're a small company and we help companies actually implement AR and VR. We talk to them about ways they can get real returns from the technology. We generally focus on how to interact with virtual data and how to transact with virtual data, which gets into the blockchain territory that's been mentioned a couple of times. So yeah, immersive future. It's a very big, bold title. And I was trying to think of a way to summarize that for the audience. So this is sort of how I look at it. From horror show to holodeck. The poor lady on the left there is in a very early head-mounted display that looks moderately uncomfortable. And I think most people are generally, have at least heard of the concept of the Star Trek holodeck, right? That's where we want to get to. The idea that you can have an experience that is so real and so immersive you really can't tell it apart. So that's what we're going to scratch at a little bit today. I believe that was late 80s, early 90s, and I think it's an early flight sim. And there was a specific reason why it was that big, apparently, but it makes for a great picture. So why should you care? I think whenever you're looking at a subject like this, it's important to have a reason for actually caring about it. And it comes back to all down to data, and Connor kind of touched on this too, right? I mean, there is more and more data in the world. Every year, everybody ups the forecast as to how much data there's going to be. And the problem with that, fundamentally, is there's only so much that you can know about, which means as days go by, you know less and less about more and more things. And that's a challenge. If you've ever tried to Google search with a bad keyword, you've had that experience, right? If it's a subject matter you're not familiar with, you get terrible results. And it's because you need that fraction of knowledge about the topic, right? And so if you've got more and more topics, more and more data that you know less and less about, it makes it harder and harder to actually interpret that data. Now, as Connor also pointed out, humans are built to process data visually. And fundamentally, I see AR and VR as the way to bridge those two things. We've got a superabundance of data on the one hand, we've got a built-in system for very effectively processing visual data. So is it just about big data? Well, not to suck up to the big data folks in the room too much, but big data is kind of everything, right? It's everywhere these days. Whether you're talking about visualization, where you are simply showing the data or wandering through it, interactive visualization, where you're actually adjusting the data in real time and seeing what the impact is. The idea of augmentation that's been touched on already today, where you can view the invisible, right? Let's say you're building a circuit. Wouldn't it be great to see the hotspots or the RF emissions by looking just at the board with a pair of meta glasses or something like that? Communication, right? Very obvious uses in conceptualization of ideas and prototyping, but also in empathic communication and sharing, taking experiences that some people may not have and actually being able to share those in a much more meaningful way than just a photograph or a video. And of course, control, right? Ways to interface, new ways to interface with drones, robots, devices of all kinds, whether you're doing that remotely or if you're actually becoming that device. And all of these things are happening already. So it's always good to look at where you come from before you figure out where you're going. So for some people, and this is where we start to divide the audience a little bit by age, I suspect. Minority Report was the first time they saw something AR that they got excited about, right? With the cool gestural interface and so on. There's a lot of people in the industry now that was the thing that got them there. I'm a little older, so for me it was this one. When I was a kid, Star Wars chess, that was the thing that I wanted really badly. That was when I didn't know it was called augmented reality, but that was when I got excited about it. But it turns out we've been talking about AR for well over 100 years, and this came as a surprise to me as somebody that's been dabbling in it in a while. So Frank Baum, the guy that wrote Wizard of Oz back in 1901, wrote this as part of a story called The Master Key. I give you a pair of spectacles. When you wear them, everyone you meet will be marked on the forehead with a letter indicating their character. It will be a G for good, E for evil, F for foolish, W for wise. Now, if that's not an augmented reality headset with a social profile dynamically loading, I don't know what is, and that's 120 years ago. And of course, if you think about VR, you can go back even further. I'm sure there's nobody in the room that doesn't know who Wheatstone was, but he actually invented the stereoscopic imager, and he did it before photography was a thing. So all of his stereoscopic images were actually hand-drawn. So in other words, we've been dabbling with this for a concept for nearly 200 years now. So it's a good job we're finally seeing some progress, I think. So where are we now? On the VR side, I'm focusing mostly on the higher end of consumer products at the moment, but these are all very good systems, the Vive, the Rift, and the PlayStation VR. It actually works. If you try them, it's actually pretty convincing. It's got excellent tracking. I'm a little biased towards the Vive, but the tracking on the Vive is good enough if you haven't tried it. With your vision completely obscured, just seeing a virtual environment, someone can throw a tracker to you, and it will track well enough for you to be able to catch it. That's pretty impressive. And it feels immersive. If the experience is constructed correctly, it feels very immersive. There are some weaknesses, right? It's big, it's heavy. They're not very comfortable. You've got a huge cable hanging off your head. The resolution could be better. And there's a whole huge area of haptics and interaction models, which Connor already touched on, that needs a lot of work. Now, on the AR side, you've got the HoloLens and the Meta, which are both shipping. This is actually an earlier graphic I put together for Magic Leap before they released a picture of their headset. I actually prefer the unicorn wrapped in bacon. I think it's more attractive than what they put out, but that's just my opinion. In terms of strengths, AR is kind of at it makes a nice demo stage, right? It's almost usable. For certain small markets, it's really quite usable, but as a broad consumer proposition, it's not there yet. The weakness is, well, it inherits all of AR's challenges in terms of resolution and comfort and so on. It also gets squarely into field of view and image quality. Those are huge technical challenges in the world of AR. And there's a broader question of functional utility, actually getting it to do useful things. So the trouble with AR is you scratch away at the surface on what seems like a good idea, and there is a mountain of technical support that you need to make things happen. So where are we going from here? Well, I can do the lazy person's version, right, and say, okay, look at the history of tech. It's going to get smaller, faster, cheaper, more powerful, fewer cables or cable-free, and you're already seeing a lot of this play out in the VR market. It's going to get simpler to set up, less intrusive, may get less ugly. Tech isn't always great about doing that over time, and it'll probably get more engaging. Those are the easy ones. What about some of the hard things? Well, there's a few of them. Ubiquitous environmental recognition, understanding context at all times. Laws of physics, those get to be very inconvenient. Common senses beyond sight and hearing, especially touch. And then non-obvious senses, and I'll talk about those more in a minute. User interaction models, how you actually do all this stuff in AR and VR, very unclear. Social interaction models. Safety and privacy, safety and privacy, that's another one too. So in terms of environmental recognition, what you really want is seamless interaction between the virtual and the real, right? So you want contextual awareness, you want object recognition, you want facial recognition. There's a ton of computer vision challenges in there, all of which ideally need to happen real time, which means either massive cloud support, massive local power, compute power, some kind of fog hybrid. Nobody can really do unconstrained object recognition and tracking at this point. You can do it if you know the context of the scene you're going into, but just to walk into a room like this and identify chairs and tables and people, that's really hard. So is real-time facial recognition. Let's say we instrument the entire room. How do we get that data usefully into the headset environment, the AR environment, so you can make use of it? How do you process all of that data? Laws of physics. I was a physics major a long time ago, and even I know that some of these things are tricky. Optics, right? The principal way to shrink an HMD down is to have smaller optics, but you're running squarely against physics with that. There are thin film lenses and waveguides. We've been talking about retinal projection for about 40 years now. It seems to be getting closer, but it's still a very difficult set of problems. Power. The second you go wireless, you're at the mercy of the battery curve, right? That's a huge challenge in all of consumer electronics. Another one that people don't think about as much is heat and radiation, and very specifically, specific absorption. If you're thinking about the future and you're picturing a magic contact lens that is going to be your AR headset, you don't want cables coming out of your eyes, right? That's a given. So you're probably talking about wireless, but your eye is very soft tissue and it's right next to your brain. So you've got some very real radiation concerns that you have to think through if you're even going to come close to that. And never mind heat, right? Nobody wants their eyeballs running at the temperature of your average GPU. That's not going to end well. And then there's the whole area of senses. So I think it's fair to say we do audio very well, right? The audio on the HoloLens, for example, or any of the VR headsets is pretty good. Visual is, kind of in the middle somewhere. Touch is very poorly solved. Right now you've got vibration motors. That's about it. And if you think about touch, it combines pressure, friction, torsion, temperature, and vibration all at the same time, all simultaneously. And we have no idea how to convey that in a practical device that anybody's actually going to be caught dead using. We're also missing some very key senses. In school you're taught that you have 5 senses. I'm not sure about smell and taste in VR. I think I can probably live without either of those. But there are things like spatial awareness. Anybody that spends time in an HMD knows you lose track of where you are in the real world completely. Proprioception, the sense of where your body physically is in a space and the strength and effort that you're putting forth on something. Your sense of equilibrium and balance and posture, all missing in VR. And the last one that's kind of interesting because you could use it for good or for evil is chronoception, how you perceive time going by. If you're spending all of your day in a virtual environment, we really don't understand quite how the brain monitors the passage of time. Another huge area, and I lump them together in one slide because they're not, strictly speaking, pure technical problems, is interaction, safety, and privacy. So on the interaction side, how do you interact with something that you're not physically touching? Connor touched briefly on the idea of affordances in UX design, right? If you've got a door that can only be pushed, don't put a big handle that invites you to pull it, right? That's in a nutshell. But let's say you're doing a virtual whiteboard. You've got your virtual whiteboard, a virtual pen, and a virtual cloth to clean it off. But you can't touch the pen. You don't know where the whiteboard really is. You don't feel it when you're moving your hands. So how can you meaningfully interact with it? It's very, very, very challenging. Switching to safety, right? What happens when everything's convincingly real? Huge opportunities for exploits by imposters. Are you all familiar with the term rickrolling? It was a big thing a few years ago, right? You send somebody a link and it links to a horrible Rick Astley music video. In VR, that will be a thing. You think you're playing a game or whatever, and you will suddenly find yourself surrounded by something that you didn't want to see or didn't care about, or those kind of Easter eggs and rickrolling will be a thing in VR. And what happens to privacy when we can replicate you? Not just your credit card numbers, not just your social security number, but your physical form, your voice, how you physically move, and your actual behavior. Because guess what? If you're wearing full body trackers so your avatar looks realistic in 3D, that's going to give a unique signature that's unique to you. So there are already demos at SIGGRAPH last year where they were showing a single webcam able to take video of somebody, famous character, and in real time, my face can be used to puppeteer that. And we are not that far from doing the same with voice. So privacy and safety are going to be huge issues as we get further down this rabbit hole. There's also the whole area of using and fooling the brain, and obviously Connor knows far more about this area than I do. there is definitely kind of the great hope that a brain-computer interface would solve some of these problems. Because if we could just route around the need for physics and optics and go straight to your brain, that would be pretty cool. That would solve a lot of our problems. It could potentially solve the sensory perception problem too. I've tried a number of the haptic devices out there. There are some now that basically try and stimulate your nerve impulses in your arm. So you wear a little metal plate and it sends voltage down there. The demo that I tried was supposed to feel like a small bird landing gently on your hand. What it actually felt like was a small bird with a large taser, which again, probably not the result that they were really going for. And as has been touched on already, our understanding of how the brain processes data and inputs and signals is really still pretty primitive. It's very early stage, and practical solutions seem a very long way away. But, there's a but. Trickery might be an interesting option here. I've seen a couple of different examples of this. There's a company called Tactical Haptics. And they're a great example of this. They made a linear actuator, and what it does is it's built into a joystick, and as you grip the joystick, it twists your skin by moving up and down. It's just flat plates. But they figured out an algorithm that very convincingly can trick your brain into thinking that the only reason your skin is moving like that is because there's a weight in your hand. And they have a demo with a fishing rod where you cast the line and a fish tugs on it. And you would swear somebody is pulling on the thing. And it is simply because the skin is being twisted in such a way that your brain goes, hang on a minute, that only happens if there's a weight in your hand. So I think there's some potential there, but again, it's a very new field. So to wrap up, a few different conclusions. There are some serious non-trivial problems to solve in all of this. Some of them are social and data-based. Some of them are pure technology, and some of them are hard physics problems. I would argue that today's VR has practical application in many different business and consumer roles. AR is somewhat lagging behind. It's pretty clear to me that the combination of big data and fog computing and digital senses in the brain are all deeply relevant to where we go with AR and VR, and it's basically a crossroads for all of those separate pieces. And if you haven't seen Black Mirror and you want to see how this can all go horribly wrong, you absolutely should watch some of their episodes on AR and VR. Thank you very much.
Panasonic.